What do you do when? Number 4. Another of the questions that we are often asked on solution-focused training courses is, what do you do when people have differing best hopes? And I guess by this question, people don't mean, what do you do when, for example, one member of the family says, I want things at home to be calmer, and someone else in the family says, I want us to get on better, and someone else says, I want us to be happier. But when the best hopes appear, certainly at first glance, to seem contradictory. For example, one person might say, for example, that their best hopes are to have more me time, more time on my own. And the other person in a relationship, for example, might say, I want us to spend more time together. Or, of course, a parent and an adolescent, or parents and adolescent, or carers and an adolescent. The carers might say, I just want him to listen. I want him to do what I ask him to do. Whilst the young person might look at us soulfully and say, I just want to be trusted. And of course, trust, translated from an adolescent's language, tends to mean something on the lines of, I'll be allowed to do whatever I want to do, whenever I want to do it, and my carers will fund it and collect me afterwards with no questions asked. So at first glance, in both those cases, the best hopes appear to be contradictory. Now, there is a way of finding a way of working with even apparently contradictory best hopes. And the key question that we have to ask is, and what difference would that make? So, if we're working with a couple and one member of the couple says, I need more me time, more time on my own, and we can then respond by saying, if you had exactly the right amount of time on your own, what difference are you hoping that would make in your relationship? And very typically people at that point will say, well, I'd be happier. And we follow that up by saying, and if you are happier, what difference might that make in the family, in your relationship? And people respond by saying, not untypically, there'd be fewer arguments. And we can say, and if there were fewer arguments, would you be pleased that there were fewer arguments? And people say yes. And so we can then say, so what are you hoping might take the place of arguments? Well, we'd be enjoying our time together. We'd be going out. We'd be doing things like it was when we first got together. And then, of course, we can talk to the other person and say, so if you had more time together in a way that was just right for you and just right for your relationship, what difference are you hoping that would make? And the person typically responds by saying, I'd be happier. And if you are more happier in a way that was good for you and good for the relationship, what difference might that make? And people say, and you can see how this goes, there'd be fewer arguments. So what might take the place of arguments? And we begin to describe a relationship going better. And of course, it's just the same with the carer or carers and the adolescent. If he were to do exactly what you wanted first time every time, what difference might that make in the family? And typically carers say there'd be fewer arguments. Would you be happier? Yes. So what would take the place of the arguments? Well, we'd be happier, we'd be getting on better, we'd be having more fun. And how would your young person, the adolescent, know that you are happier to notice him, whatever? And again, we turn to the adolescent, and if you're trusted in the way that was just right for you, what difference would that make? So just asking that question, what difference, very often, it's hard to explain this or to describe this, but as I would see it, jumps the level of description up to a more generic and inclusive level of description. And at that higher level of description, what we typically discover is that people want the same thing. People want to be happier at some level. And of course, as we describe happy, or as they describe happy, as we ask questions which invite them to describe happy, what we're not doing is negotiating with them the right amount of me time and together time, or the right amount of trust versus jumping to it. When we invite people to describe those futures that they want, in solution focus, we trust them to find their own way to the right balance in their relationship. But, and that's not a very typical solution focus word, is it? But, there are times when it appears not to be possible to do this. When actually the person, perhaps you working with a couple, and one person is very, very, very clear that they want to separate and the other person wants to be together. And we work really hard on best hopes, and it still stays difficult in terms of separating and together. And with this particular couple, however hard we try, actually it's hard to move beyond people attacking, one person attacking and criticizing the other, and the other in their turn attacking and criticizing the first for their best hopes. And when that happens, when somehow it doesn't appear to be possible to find an inclusive best hope, something that both of them could subscribe to, sometimes of course it is. You know, we can say, so while the two of you are working hard to figure out the best way forward in your relationship, how would you know that actually things were going as well as they could for both of you as you try and find your way to the right decision? And you know, sometimes people will actually go down that track, and sometimes they don't. And if they don't, and if all people are doing is attacking and criticizing each other, then actually the most useful thing to do is to see people separately. Sitting with people in sessions who are arguing very rarely turns out to be useful. So actually, people starting from differing best hopes typically isn't as difficult as it appears. And the key question is, and what difference are you hoping that that would make? What we're remembering is the distinction between outcome and pathway towards outcome. The trusting or the jumping to it, the closeness or the separation, are not assumed to be the outcomes. The outcome that we're inviting people to describe is the difference that those pathways might make.